He was a millionaire CEO who had everything money could buy, yet nothing that truly mattered. One spring morning, as cherry blossoms fell like confetti in the park, he crossed paths with a fragile little girl wearing a hospital bracelet and clutching a broken teddy bear. Her words shattered the walls around his heart. "I don't think I'm going to get better. You look sad too." In that instant, two strangers bound by loss and longing collided, and neither of their lives would ever be the same again. What followed was a promise that would test his soul, a sacrifice that could break him, and a second chance at love and family he never thought he deserved. This is not just a story, it is a revelation of grief, hope, and redemption. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to Silent Lies for stories that will haunt and heal you. The morning air carried the fragrance of cherry blossoms, their pale pink petals drifting like a celebration for strangers. Graham Bennett walked with his hands buried deep inside the pockets of his dark overcoat, his stride measured, precise, detached. To the casual eye, he was a man in control, his shoes polished, his collar turned up against the soft breeze, his posture upright. But beneath the tailored perfection was an emptiness that no one on that path could see. Couples pushed strollers, joggers laughed in pairs, a golden retriever leapt for a thrown ball. The world pulsed with life, yet Graham was untouched by it. He had not felt spring for years, not since the accident, not since Claire. The gusts of wind lifted blossoms into the air, twisting them into spirals that once would have reminded him of his daughter's laughter. She used to chase petals with reckless joy, her giggles spilling out like music. That music had stopped the night the car spun across wet pavement and shattered everything. He could still hear the echo of her last laugh when silence claimed the house forever. Since then, he returned here every week. Same time, same bench, not to feel alive but to avoid forgetting. Pain was his anchor. He feared the day it loosened and left him adrift. As he turned the corner near the stone fountain, his eyes fell on a figure too small, too fragile, sitting alone on a weathered bench. A little girl with tangled blonde curls, wearing a pink sweater that seemed too thin for the cool morning. Her legs dangled above the ground, kicking softly as though she were half present in the world and half somewhere else. In her lap rested a worn teddy bear, its missing button eye giving it a haunted look, as if it too carried scars it could not explain. Graham's instinct was to look away. He was not in the habit of noticing children anymore. But then she spoke. "I do not think I am going to get better," the girl whispered, almost as if confessing to the squirrel perched nearby. Her voice was soft, steady, heartbreakingly calm. "But the sun still feels nice." The sentence cut through Graham like a sudden blade. He stopped without realizing it, his breath caught against his will. He had trained himself not to react, not to feel, but something in those words pressed against the oldest wound inside him. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he turned toward her. Her eyes lifted to meet his large, startlingly bright, the kind of eyes that refused to dim even as her skin betrayed her weakness. Around her wrist, a hospital bracelet glinted in the sunlight, its plastic edges reflecting everything he wanted to avoid. She could not have been older than 6, his daughter's age when the world collapsed. For a suspended moment, they only stared, strangers bound by a silent recognition that neither could name. "You look sad too," she said. It was not pity. It was not curiosity. It was the simple recognition of a child who had lived too close to pain. The words landed like someone tapping on an old scar, forcing him to remember that hurt never really leaves. His throat tightened. He tried to speak but found nothing. The silence between them grew heavier, until she patted the empty space beside her. "You can sit if you want. I don't bite." It almost startled a laugh out of him, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, the ghost of something he thought was gone forever. Slowly, cautiously, he lowered himself onto the bench, afraid that even the smallest movement might break the fragile moment that hung between them. "What is your name?" His voice sounded rougher than he expected, like a man unused to using it for anything tender. "Lily. Lily Carter." She hugged the one-eyed bear to her chest. "What about you?" "Graham," he answered. "Just Graham?" He gave a small nod. "Just Graham." She seemed to accept that. The wind tossed her curls across her face, and with the weary patience of someone much older than 6, she tucked them back behind her ear. The bear slipped, and she caught it quickly, holding it with a grip too tight for such thin fingers. Graham's eyes caught on the faded sticker on the bear's chest, a cheerful cartoon from a pediatric oncology ward. His stomach clenched. "Where's your mom?" he asked gently. "Up there." Lily pointed toward the tall buildings lining the park. "She's working." Maya said I needed fresh air, so here I am. She giggled. Maya's my nurse. Like a superhero, but instead of flying, she gives medicine. Despite himself, Graham felt something soften inside him, a small tug at the corners of his lips. But the softness faded as he looked at her pale cheeks, her sunken eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. He had seen that kind of fragile strength before in the final weeks of Claire's life, when every smile carried more weight than any child should bear. Do you come here often? He asked. When I feel good enough, she said. I like the trees. And sometimes people leave breadcrumbs for the birds. She leaned closer as if sharing a secret. But I think the squirrels eat them first. For the first time in years, Graham chuckled. The sound startled him. It felt like something foreign had escaped his chest. They sat together for a while, saying nothing, watching petals scatter across the grass. Then Lily spoke again, her words detonating quietly inside him. You remind me of my dad, she said. Graham froze, his head snapping toward her. Before he could reply, she added quickly, If I had one. Mom says he left before I was born, but I like to imagine what he might be like. You look like you'd be a good one. The air thickened, pressing on his chest. He swallowed hard, fighting to stay composed. He stared at the trees because if he looked at her, really looked, something inside him might collapse for good. Lily, with the innocence of a child and the wisdom of someone who had faced mortality too soon, did not press. She leaned against her bear and whispered, I don't want to die. The world seemed to pause. Even the wind stilled, as if holding its breath. Graham turned to her slowly, her eyes closed now, her small hands curled tight around the bear's ear. His own chest ached in a way it had not in years. Without thinking, he removed the scarf from his neck and draped it gently over her shoulders. You need something warmer, he said quietly. She smiled faintly without opening her eyes. Thanks, just Graham. He stood there longer than he should have, unsure why he was hesitating, why his feet refused to move. Something inside him shifted that morning, fragile promise forming before he could name it. Finally he asked, almost afraid of his own voice, Would you like me to walk you back to Maya? Her eyes opened slowly. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but you have to promise not to disappear after. The words pierced him deeper than she knew. He hesitated, then answered before reason could stop him. I promise. And for the first time in years he meant it. The night after he met Lily, Graham sat in his immaculate kitchen, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He had poured it out of habit, the way he always did when the silence grew too heavy, but tonight even the drink felt foreign, like it belonged to a man he no longer was. He stared at the city lights outside his window, but all he could hear was her voice looping in his mind. You look sad too, the words clung to him, soft yet merciless, tearing at walls he had built with such precision. He closed his eyes and saw her hospital bracelet sliding against her small wrist, the way she had whispered about dying as if she were discussing the weather. He remembered the faint smile when he gave her his scarf, and the way she had made him promise not to disappear. It had been years since a promise meant anything to him, but this one did. By dawn he had barely slept, restless in a way that left him raw. He dressed in his uniform dark suit, crisp shirt, polished shoe sand, walked into the boardroom like a ghost. Voices droned around him, charts and numbers flashing on screens, but none of it penetrated. A junior executive handed him a stack of reports, and for the first time in his career, Graham did not care. He set the papers aside and told his assistant to cancel the rest of his day. He left without explanation. The driver scrambled to open the car door, but Graham waved him off. He walked instead. The city buzzed around him, full of people who had not closed themselves off from life. For the first time in years, he envied them. When he reached the park, he half feared the bench would be empty, that Lily would be nothing more than a fragile dream from yesterday. But there she was, sitting with her nurse Maya, her curls caught in the wind, her bear perched on her lap. She saw him before he spoke, her face lighting up in a way that stopped him cold. Just Graham, she exclaimed. The sound hit him like sunlight through a locked room. He crouched beside her, pretending to catch his breath, though what shook him was not exhaustion but relief. Maya gave him a cautious smile. She said you might come back, she remarked. Looks like she was right. Graham looked at Lily. You believed I would? He asked softly. She shrugged, simple and certain. You promised, and I believed you. It was as if she had said something sacred. He sat beside her and for the first time in years felt the weight of trust pressing against him, fragile but unshakable. They fed crumbs to the pigeons together, and though her small hands trembled, she laughed every time a bird fluttered too close. He asked her about her illness, carefully, hesitantly, but she explained with the bluntness of a child who had repeated the words too often. Since she was 4, she said, her blood did not work right. It made her tired. Sometimes it hurt. She needed a bone marrow transplant, but matches were rare. She told him her mother was trying everything, but the kind of smile her mother wore these days was not the kind that reached her eyes. Graham listened and felt the weight in his chest grow heavier with every word. He did not know what to say, so he only nodded, eyes steady, heart breaking quietly. He knew what it was to watch someone you loved suffer and be powerless. He had lived that already, and now he was living it again, with a child who was not his, yet felt inexplicably like his own. She looked at him then, serious and calm. "It is not your fault," she said. He almost laughed at the absurdity. How many times had people told him that after Claire died? Yet from Lily's lips, the words cut differently. They carried no pity, only truth. It shook him. "Do you have a kid?" she asked. His breath caught. He could have lied. He could have deflected. Instead, he whispered, "I did." Her name was Claire. The silence after was sharp. Finally, Lily said, "I am sorry." And he believed her because she spoke it the way she said everything else, honest and simple. That evening, when Maya announced it was time to return to the hospital, Lily slipped her hand into his without hesitation. Her fingers were so small, so cold, yet steady. As they walked, she looked up at him and whispered, "You are different today. You do not look as lost." He swallowed, unable to answer. She grinned. "Was it me?" He knelt, touched her shoulder gently, and nodded. "Yes, Lily, I think it was." Later that night, Graham stood outside the children's hospital, staring at the sliding glass doors. It had been years since he had walked into one, the last time holding Claire's hand as monitors beeped out her final rhythm. He almost turned away, but then he heard Lily's laugh echo in his memory, and he stepped inside. Room 312 smelled of bleach and faint cocoa. Lily sat upright in bed, her bear tucked beside her, her mother at her side. Elena Carter was younger than Graham expected, but her face was marked by exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying too much alone. When Graham introduced himself, she studied him with suspicion. Her arms crossed tightly. "We do not need charity," she said sharply. "I am not offering charity," Graham replied. "I am just showing up." Her eyes searched his, looking for an angle, for a motive, but he gave none. Over the next days he returned, sometimes with cocoa in a real mug, sometimes with markers and sketch pads, sometimes with nothing but his presence. Slowly, Elena's guard softened. She never asked for help, but she began to accept it. She saw how Lily's eyes brightened when he entered, how the girl seemed stronger when he was near. Still, she warned him once, "Do not make promises you cannot keep. She gets attached fast." "I know," Graham said, "but I am not going anywhere." The words surprised even him. He had spent years building a life of walls, one that required no promises, no attachments, and yet here he was, offering exactly that to a child who had nothing but hope left. One evening, when Lily showed him a drawing of 3 stick figures under a bright sun, her mother, herself, and an empty space beside them, she explained it simply. "I left that one open, in case someone wanted to stay." Graham stared at the blank space until his vision blurred. For the first time in years, he wanted to be the one to fill it. Graham's calendar remained blocked with vague titles: client review, site visit, executive prep. The truth was simpler. Every afternoon, as the city rushed around him with its endless meetings and deals, he slipped away and walked through the sterile hospital doors toward room 312. At first, he told himself it was temporary, an act of compassion, a way of honoring Claire's memory. But as days turned into weeks, that excuse dissolved. He was no longer visiting a stranger. He was returning to someone who waited for him. Lily welcomed him each time with a smile that grew stronger even as her body remained frail. Some afternoons she wanted to draw, her small hands clutching the new markers he had bought her, carefully arranging them in a rainbow line before starting. She would hum while sketching suns with smiling faces, bears that could fly, and houses with doors wide open. Other days she wanted cocoa in the chipped blue mug he always brought from the cafe, sipping slowly as though savoring magic instead of chocolate. When fatigue pressed too hard, she simply rested while he sat beside her in silence. the soft beep of monitors filling the space. Graham had lived in silence for years, but this one was different. It was not empty. It was shared. Elena Carter watched with quiet suspicion at first. She stood at her daughter's side like a soldier, arms crossed, eyes sharp, ready to defend. When Graham set a cocoa mug on the tray table one evening, she frowned. "We do not need charity," she said again. But he did not bristle. He only replied, "It is not charity if I am drinking it with her." He poured himself a second cup in the plain hospital styrofoam, and for the first time, Elena's expression softened. She did not thank him, but she did not stop him either. The barrier between them began to shift slowly. She noticed how Lily's cheeks carried a faint glow after his visits, how her daughter laughed more easily, how she fell asleep with less fear when Graham read aloud from The Little Prince. One night, Elena stepped into the hallway to take a call, and when she returned, she found Lily asleep, her bear tucked under her arm, and Graham sitting quietly in the chair, his head bowed, a paper crown askew on his head. Lily had made it earlier, declaring him her royal helper. Elena stared at him for a long moment. For the first time, he did not look like a CEO, not like a man defined by power or wealth. He looked like a father. Still, she remained guarded. In the break room one evening, she told him directly, "She has been disappointed too many times. People come and go. Promises break her more than the illness does." Graham met her gaze steadily. "I am not leaving," he said. She studied him for a long moment, and then turned away, as though afraid to believe. At home, Graham felt the changes more deeply. His penthouse had always been a shrine to control immaculate counters, untouched bookshelves, a refrigerator that contained nothing personal. One evening, after Lily had given him another drawing a house with 3 figures beneath a shining sun, Hay carried it home and pinned it to his refrigerator with a magnet. It was the first new thing to hang there since Claire's death. His chest tightened as he looked at it. He realized he was no longer living inside the shadow of loss alone. He was carrying new light. The cafe he had avoided for years became part of his ritual again. It was the same place he had once visited with Claire, where she had chosen cookies shaped like stars and laughed at the crooked mugs on the shelves. Now Graham stood at the counter each morning, asking for cocoa and watching as the barista packed it into the chipped mug his daughter had once loved. The act felt like stepping back into memory and reshaping it into something new. Each sip Lily took was a bridge between past and present. One afternoon, Graham brought not just cocoa and markers, but a small flower pot filled with soil and seeds. "So we can grow something together," he told Lily. Her eyes widened, and she clasped her hands around the pot as though it were treasure. They placed it by the window where sunlight filtered in, and Graham wrote the words "Claire's Light" on a label before pressing it into the dirt. Lily nodded solemnly. "She will like that," she whispered. Elena, standing behind them, covered her mouth with her hand. She did not speak, but her eyes glistened. It was not gifts that bound them, though. It was Graham's presence, steady and unbroken. He learned to braid Lily's curls clumsily, his large hands trembling with the effort. He learned how to warm soup in the nurse's microwave, how to tell bedtime stories until her breathing grew even, how to hold space for Elena when she was too tired to speak. He had no manual, no strategy. He simply kept showing up. And in that act, he discovered something more powerful than money: consistency, the willingness to stay when it hurt. Nurse Maya noticed it too. One evening, she caught Graham lingering outside Lily's room even after visiting hours. "You are in deep now," she teased gently. He gave a small laugh, admitting, "Deeper than I planned." She looked at him seriously then. "She is getting stronger. You are part of that." Graham swallowed, unable to respond, but in his heart, he knew it was true. Lily's laughter had stitched something back together inside him that he thought was gone forever. One night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Elena sat across from him in the dim hospital room. The monitors glowed softly, casting light on her weary face. "Why us?" she asked suddenly. The question was sharp, almost accusing. Graham considered, then spoke honestly. "Because I lost my daughter. And for a long time I thought that meant I could not be a father to anyone again. But Lily, she did not ask for perfection. She just needed someone who would stay." Elena blinked quickly, fighting tears. She did not answer, but for the first time she did not look away. Graham went home that night and added another piece to his refrigerator. Beside Lily's drawing, he placed a photograph of Claire in her yellow sundress, freckles bright beneath the summer sun. Next to it, he stuck a note he had written in his own hand. "Keep showing up. It became his mantra, a vow he repeated silently each time he walked through the hospital doors. For the first time in years, he was not haunted only by what he had lost. He was driven by what he still had the chance to protect. The illusion of borrowed time shattered one gray morning. Dr. Patel entered Lily's room with a stillness that said more than his words ever could. Elena sat at her daughter's side, her fingers curled around a paper cup of untouched cocoa, and Graham stood by the window, his posture rigid as if bracing for impact. The doctor's tone was practiced, calm, yet heavy with finality. "We are out of options," he said. The silence that followed was suffocating. Elena's voice cracked first. "She is in the registry. We have checked every list. There has to be someone." "There is no full match," Patel replied gently. "Not in the time frame we need." Elena's composure snapped. "So what? We wait? We watch her slip away?" Her words sliced through the sterile air, trembling with rage and despair. Graham's voice cut in, quieter but sharper than steel. "There has to be another way." The doctor hesitated, then finally nodded. "There is one last option, a partial match, higher risk. But if we act aggressively, with the right prep protocol, it might work. We would need a donor willing immediately, healthy enough to withstand the procedure." The silence that followed was unbearable. Elena's hand clutched Lily's, her knuckles white. Graham did not speak. He only turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like the toll of a bell. The elevator doors closed around him, and by the time he reached the garage, his legs nearly gave out. He stumbled into the shadows between parked cars and finally broke. The sobs tore through him violently, years of repressed grief erupting all at once. He had not cried like this since Claire's machines went quiet. Not at her funeral. Not when he packed away her drawings. Not when the house went silent. But here, now, with Lily's life slipping through his fingers, the storm inside him erupted. It was not grief alone. It was fear, raw and suffocating. For the first time in years, he was terrified of losing someone again. When the worst of it passed, he dragged himself upright, his chest heaving, and pulled out his phone. His voice cracked when he asked the front desk nurse for directions. "Where is the testing wing?" he demanded. She blinked, startled, but gave him the answer. He walked there without hesitation, without telling anyone, and signed the papers that would determine everything. The next morning, Graham sat in a consultation room, his shirt sleeve rolled up, the faint sting of a blood draw still lingering. Dr. Patel entered with a folder, his expression grave but tinged with something almost like relief. "You are not a perfect match," he said, "but you are closer than anyone we have seen. It is possible." "I will do it," Graham interrupted. "Mr. Bennett, you need to understand. It is painful. Recovery will take days. There are risks, complications. I said I will do it." His tone left no room for debate. "Just give her a chance." Patel nodded slowly. "Does Elena know?" Graham shook his head. "Not yet. She does not need to carry that weight before she has to." 2 days later, his absence was noticed. For the first time in weeks, he did not appear with Coco, did not bring markers, did not sit by Lily's side. Elena brushed her daughter's curls from her forehead, telling her he was busy, but unease twisted in her stomach. By the second morning, her worry turned sharp. She pulled Maya aside, her voice low, urgent. "Where is he?" Maya hesitated, then sighed and gave a single nod toward the west wing. "Recovery room 3B. Elena did not wait. She pushed the door open to find Graham pale against the sheets, a stitched line across his shoulder, tubes feeding into his arm. He stirred weakly when their eyes met, trying to straighten, trying to pretend he was stronger than he looked. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped closer. He gave a crooked smile. "I figured that would be your first line. You did not tell me you went through surgery without saying a word. I did not want to worry you." His voice was rough, weakened. "You are the donor?" Her eyes scanned the monitors, the IV line, the evidence written across his body. She already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it. He nodded faintly. Her composure cracked then, tears spilling before she could stop them. "Why would you do this?" His reply was almost a whisper. "Because I already lost one daughter. I cannot lose another." Later that day, Lily stirred awake in her hospital bed, groggy but alive. "Mama?" she murmured. Elena leaned close, her hand trembling against her daughter's cheek. "I am here, sweetheart. Did it work?" "Yes, baby," Elena whispered through tears. "You are safe." Lily's small hand reached out, searching. "Where is Graham?" "He is resting," Elena said softly. He gave you something special. Lily frowned faintly. Like a present? Elena's voice broke. A piece of himself. The little girl was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "He gave me his magic, didn't he?" Elena laughed softly through her tears. "Yes, sweet girl, he did." That evening, Graham stood weakly in the doorway, stitches tugging, pain still sharp, but his eyes locked on Lily's small frame beneath the blankets. When she noticed him, her smile broke through the haze of medication. "You came back," she said sleepily. "I told you I would. You look like you gave away something important." "I did." With effort, she reached into her drawer and pulled out a small red heart sticker, the kind she often used for her drawings. She motioned for him to come closer. When he leaned down, she pressed it gently to the back of his hand. "For brave people only," she whispered. Behind them, Elena stood silently, her hands clasped tightly to keep from trembling. Tears blurred her vision, but for the first time in a long time they were not from despair. They were from something rarer. Hope. Outside, the spring deepened. The blossoms gave way to green leaves, the park waiting silently just beyond the hospital walls. Inside room 312, laughter returned in fragile bursts. It was not the laughter of denial, not the forced smiles of survival. It was real. And it was enough to remind all of them that sometimes, even when the world insists there are no options left, love creates one more. The weeks after the transplant blurred into a fragile rhythm of slow recovery. Lily's cheeks filled with faint color. Her eyes regained their light, and laughter returned to her voice in soft bursts that startled nurses in the hallway. Each small step forward felt monumental, a victory carved from despair. Graham was there for all of it. Despite his own soreness, despite the lingering pain of his surgery, he came each day, carrying cocoa in the chipped blue mug, fresh sketch pads, or simply the steady presence of a man who refused to leave. For Elena, it was harder to accept. She had lived years behind walls built from necessity. She had learned not to expect consistency from anyone. Yet here was Graham, showing up again and again, sitting through the endless beeps of monitors, reading aloud when Lily's energy faltered, or braiding her curls with awkward fingers that made the child giggle. Slowly, Elena's suspicion shifted into something else. She still studied him carefully, testing his endurance, but she could not deny what she saw. Her daughter trusted him completely. One evening, Lily handed Graham another drawing. This one showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a house. A bright sun smiled above, and on the door was a heart. "That is our home," she explained. "Me, Mommy, and the space for someone who stays." She left the blank figure open again. Graham studied it for a long time before folding it as carefully as if it were glass. That night, he placed it on his refrigerator beside Claire's photograph and whispered the words he had begun to live by. "Keep showing up." Weeks later, the doctor finally signed Lily's discharge papers. The hospital staff gathered to wave goodbye as she clutched her bear, her markers, and a tiny pot of green sprout she had named Claire's Light. Graham drove them away from the sterile corridors, his hands steady on the wheel. Elena seated beside him, silent but thoughtful. Lily sat in the back, her face pressed against the window, eyes wide as the city passed in a blur. When the car pulled up to a lakefront house, Elena froze. Sunlight spilled across the porch. Lavender stood fresh in a vase by the door, and a hand-painted sign read, "Welcome home, Carter girls." Her lips parted in disbelief. "What is this?" she asked. Graham took a breath. "It is not charity. It is not pity. It is a home, if you want it." Her eyes brimmed with tears, torn between protest and longing. Lily squealed and darted inside, her laughter ringing through the hall as she discovered the mural Graham had commissioned in her new room, a treehouse in the clouds with her name written across the sky. Elena stepped across the threshold slowly, her hand brushing the wall as though afraid it might disappear. That first night, they sat on the back deck eating grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. The setting sun painted the lake in shades of gold. Lily curled against Graham, her crown of paper perched crookedly on her head, her eyes heavy but content. Elena sat across from them, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. When a social worker named Ava arrived for a scheduled check-in, she observed quietly before opening her folder. "She seems happy here," Ava said. "Safe." Elena nodded. "She is." Ava turned to Graham. "Have you considered legal guardianship in case—" "I do not need a title to love her like my own," Graham interrupted gently. "But if it protects her, then yes. I will do whatever it takes." Elena's eyes flicked to him then, lingering with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She had spent so long depending on no one that leaning on someone else felt like betrayal of her own strength. But watching Lily curl into Graham's side, hearing her daughter's laughter return, she knew the truth. He had already become part of their family. Days in the lake house passed with a new rhythm. Lily filled sketchbooks with suns, flowers, and portraits of the three of them together. Graham learned to cook simple meals and laughed when Lily declared his pancakes lopsided but perfect. Elena found herself standing in the garden one morning, watching Graham teach Lily how to plant flowers in the soil. The sight of their hands working together, one large and one small, nearly undid her. Later, she confronted him softly on the porch. "You do not have to do all of this," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I want to. You are making it hard for me to keep my walls up." "Good," he answered simply. She looked at him for a long time then, and for the first time, she did not feel the instinct to turn away. One evening, Lily fell asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open on her lap. Graham lifted her carefully, tucking her into bed, while Elena watched from the doorway. When he pulled the blanket over the little girl, Lily stirred, mumbling softly, "Do you think someone like you could be a real dad?" Graham froze, his throat tightening. He bent down, brushing her hair back gently. "I think the right someone could," he whispered. She smiled faintly in her sleep, her small fingers clutching the blanket. Elena stepped into the room after he left, staring at her daughter's peaceful face. She had always carried the weight alone, always told herself it was safer that way. But as she listened to Lily's steady breathing and thought of the man who had just tucked her in, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe, at last, she did not have to carry everything by herself. Graham stood outside on the porch, staring at the lake. The reflection of the stars shimmered across the water. For the first time in years, he felt like he was not a ghost haunting his own life. He was present, anchored not by grief, but by something stronger. He turned when he heard Elena step outside, her blanket draped around her shoulders. For a long moment, they stood together in silence, the night air cool but no longer lonely. "Why us?" she asked again, her voice trembling. "Because I lost my heart once," he said quietly. "And somehow, you and Lily gave it back." She looked at him, her defenses breaking at last, and nodded. For the first time, hope did not feel dangerous. It felt like home. A year passed, measured not in wealth or business victories, but in quiet milestones no one in Graham's old world would have noticed. Lily's cheeks, once pale and hollow, had regained their color. Her laughter now rang through the house, carrying across the lake like music that refused to be silenced. The word survivor was stitched in gold thread on a ribbon tied around her wrist, and she wore it with a pride that made Graham's chest ache. Each day she grew stronger, not just in her body but in the way she embraced life, humming as she drew, singing to her bear while nurses checked her vitals, or tugging Graham by the hand toward the garden where Claire's light had flourished into green leaves. The bench in the park where everything began had been polished, its wood sanded smooth, no longer weathered by neglect. It now faced a small white canopy, rows of wooden chairs arranged beneath it. The park was blooming again with cherry blossoms, their petals fluttering like confetti across the path. Graham stood nearby in a light gray suit, slightly rumpled from too many hugs, a child's drawing pinned to his lapel, a sun with a crooked smile, Lily's design. He touched it absent-mindedly, grounding himself in the reminder that this day was not a dream. The guests began to gather. Nurses, neighbors, doctors who had once whispered fears now smiled openly. Maya adjusted the hem of her dress, laughing with another nurse. A few children from the ward skipped along the edges of the grass. It was not a grand affair, no orchestras, no glittering chandeliers. It was something quieter, more sacred, a celebration of survival and chosen family. Then he saw her. Elena walked down the stone path, her cream dress catching the breeze, her hair loose and softly curled. She carried no bouquet, only a smile that trembled at the edges but never faltered. Beside her skipped Lily, tossing petals from a basket, her flower crown askew, her giggles echoing like bells. She turned at one point, waving at Graham with exaggerated seriousness. "You look nervous," she whispered loudly. "I am," he admitted, his voice cracking. The ceremony was brief. Their vows, stripped of decoration, carried more weight than any polished speech. Elena took his hands and spoke with a steadiness that came from years of surviving storms. "You gave her life," she said, glancing toward Lily, who grinned through a mouthful of missing baby teeth. and you gave me back mine. I did not think I would ever find joy again, but you stayed, and that changed everything." Graham's voice shook as he answered, "I lost my heart once. I thought I would never get it back. But you and Lily showed me it was still there, waiting, and I will never take that for granted." Tears glistened, not from grief this time, but from relief, from gratitude, from love that had been tested and proven real. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Lily clapped so hard she nearly spilled her basket of petals. "Best day ever!" she shouted, and the crowd laughed through their own tears. Graham bent and kissed Elena softly, and in that moment, the park no longer felt haunted by memory. It was sanctified by renewal. Later, when the cake had been eaten and laughter carried across the grass, Graham slipped away. He walked back to the bench where it had all begun. Sitting down, he placed his palms against the wood, remembering the weight of the first time he saw Lily sitting there, a fragile child whispering about death. He thought of the promise he had made that day not to disappear. He had kept it, and it had led him here, to this impossible second chance. Footsteps approached. Lily climbed onto the bench beside him, her flower crown still perched crookedly on her head. In her small hands she carried a folded piece of paper. Without a word, she leaned her head against his arm and handed it to him. Graham opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing, full of bright colors, 3 figures beneath a tree, a bench in the background, a smiling sun above them, but this time a heart floated over their heads, connected by a thin red line. In block letters, she had written, "To the man who stayed, you are my forever." His throat closed. He could not speak. Instead, he pulled her close, pressing his lips against her crown of flowers, letting his tears fall freely. A moment later, Elena appeared, her heels dangling from her hand, her smile soft and certain. Lily patted the bench between them. "This is our spot now," she said. Elena sat, and the 3 of them leaned together, the petals drifting around them like blessings. Graham looked at them both, his chest heavy but full. "We fit," Lily whispered. "We always did," he answered. Above them the sun kept shining. The bench remained warm, and in that moment, Graham realized he had not just rebuilt a life, he had been given a second one. A life where grief no longer defined him, where promises were not broken, where love had grown again from the ashes of loss. It was not dramatic, it was not cinematic, it was real. And for Graham, Elena, and Lily, that was more than enough. Life is rarely fair. It steals without warning, it wounds without mercy, and it leaves behind empty spaces that can never truly be filled. Graham Bennett knew this better than anyone. He had lived as a ghost for years, his heart buried beside the memory of his daughter. Yet one chance encounter in a park changed the trajectory of everything. A fragile girl with tangled curls and a hospital bracelet looked at him and said, "You look sad too." And in that moment, his broken pieces began to move again. Lily did not rescue him with grandeur. She rescued him with honesty, with the quiet bravery of a child facing the possibility of death, yet still able to laugh at pigeons stealing breadcrumbs. She reminded him that love is not about perfection, it is about presence, about showing up when it hurts, staying when it is easier to leave, and giving pieces of yourself even when you are afraid there may be nothing left. Through her, Graham discovered that family is not only the one you are born into, but the one you choose to build, brick by brick, moment by moment. Elena, too, found in him a reason to lower the walls she had carried for so long. Together, they created something fragile yet unbreakable, a home built not from wealth or power, but from promises kept and hearts healed. The story of Graham, Lily, and Elena is not a fairy tale. It is not flawless or simple. It is jagged, full of grief and scars that will never disappear, but it is proof that even after devastation, life can bloom again. A father who thought he could never love, a mother who thought she had to carry the world alone, and a child who simply wanted someone to stay together. They created a second chance. Maybe that is the true miracle. Not that Lily survived, though her survival was extraordinary, but that she taught others how to live again, that she showed them love is not charity. It is not grand gestures. It is the daily choice to keep showing up. If you carry scars, if you have ever believed that hope was beyond reach, let their story remind you, you are not finished yet. Love can still find you. Life can still return in ways you never imagined. And if this story touched you, if it made you cry, or if it made you believe again in second chances, then stay with us. because there are more stories like this raw, heartbreaking, unforgettable that deserve to be told. Subscribe to Silent Lies and walk with us through the truths that pierce, the lies we carry, and the fragile beauty that survives in between.